You're listening to New England Real Estate Journal Radio with Rick Kaplan, New England source for commercial real estate news. This is New England Real Estate Journal Radio on the Money Matters Radio Network and online at moneymattersboston.com.
Welcome to the New England Real Estate Journal Radio Show. I'm Rick Kaplan with Eric Wilson. And today we have an interesting show.
We do. Very interesting.
We have Derek Peterson, and Derek is the CEO of
Of Terra Tech.
Terra Tech, but which is a cannabis, I don't know what you call it, cannabis manufacturer or it's a publicly traded urban agricultural company.
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
That focuses on local farming in medical cannabis.
But one of the things that people say, someone said it today, is why do we talk about the Olympics, the licensing of cannabis on a real estate show?
Right.
Well, it all does tie in with real estate.
Yeah, especially the commercial real estate industry.
Yeah, I mean, all these structures that need to be built. Mm-hmm. There's also the leasing of property or the sale of the property. Mm-hmm. It's all commercial.
Yeah, but I mean...
But this also puts a lot of people to work. The Olympics would put a ton of people, electricians, contractors, plumbers.
Anyone to fix the infrastructure
right.
to support it, right.
Yeah.
I think with the medical cannabis game, and I say that lightly, but you're going to need electricians for your lights. You're going to need plumbers for the water. You're going to need space, factories, security.
Right.
As you know, some banks right now are still, up in arms whether or not they can lend money.
I like that up in arms.
Yeah,
with security.
So there's a whole... It's really tied into our industry tremendously because of land and commercial use.
You're looking at retail space. Mm-hmm. You're looking at manufacturing. They call it the light industrial.
Park, yeah.
Because it's usually zoned for light industrial, and we'll find out why when we talk with Derek. Mm-hmm. But it's a unique. Because I'm not sure why they don't zone it for agricultural, because it is you are farming a product or growing it. Mm-hmm. But
it probably because it falls into the medical side, like a pharmaceutical company has light manufacturing for pills.
Right.
And
Well,
stuff like that.
Initially you're right. Initially it's falling into the medical side of things, but eventually it would probably go into the recreational side of things, which would be like alcohol or
maybe. I mean, that's what they're pushing for. I would assume.
I mean, I got to believe it's gonna.
What?
I have to believe it's gonna.
Yes. I mean, it seems like it's pushing that way, but I would say, as much as we know, it's mostly about just getting the information out first, the education. I think that there's, obviously tons of fears. It's going to be kind of difficult for them, I'm sure, to get, because it's all based on public voting. This has to go legalized before they can become,
But like
legalized in all
like
states.
I said in the car, if you take a vote today, I bet you 80% of the people out there are going to vote in favor of this. Because
I would assume so. Yeah, well, because it's criminal. Right now,
it's criminal, and it's not. It
shouldn't be.
Right. I mean,
drugs have the negative side effects enough that you don't need to punish them after.
Right. There's so many other things that officers of the law could be doing besides chasing a guy that has one little joint.
But again, I think if it does go that way, you're going to look at as obviously Derek Peterson and Terra Tech. Once the more information's out there, people can make their own decision. You're giving the information to an adult to make an adult decision. And that's really what you want to do. And that's, comes back to our founding fathers.
Yeah, and I think that the way they're releasing it, you say medical reasons, but I think that you should release this slowly like that because, there's all kinds of things that you have to work out as far as laws. Like we were driving here today and we're talking about people smoking it in their car or smoking it at work. There's all kinds of regulations that have to be in place before this can go mainstream.
Yeah, of course. I think they have to do studies on how it affects culture and society in general. I also think that, because we get to vote on these things, it's kind of a catch-22, as you say, because one thing doesn't work, and that is the war on drugs. They've had 50 years of data you can go back on. That definitely doesn't work. You've put more people in jail. All the things that they said as marijuana being a gateway drug, heroin and hard drugs or methamphetamines, that hasn't risen. You would assume it would rise as marijuana has risen. each year 20% increase each year for more people. Now that has also to do with the population growth as well, but you still see the same amount of heroin, you still see the same amount of methamphetamines. And they say like 60% of all drug crime is marijuana. So if you can get rid of that, you may be able to subsidize the others, like tobacco did. America changed the way we view tobacco. We basically put the education out there, gave everybody the information, and now less people are smoking today than they were 20 years ago because people can make the right decisions. People can make decisions that are best for themselves on an independent level that you can give them if you give them the information. There's too much disinformation.
Yeah, and I also think that the government doesn't put a lot of funding behind the research for marijuana, so people have all the true facts.
Right. Of course. Well, because there's other people in play here. There's, privatized jails. There's the pharmaceutical companies that don't want it out there.
Right. You have a lot of lobbyists that are pushing
wood companies,
against
tree
it.
companies, all your lumber companies, they don't want it because you can make paper out of hemp. You can do all these. It's such a versatile and big tool that I think that's why there's such a huge proponent behind pushing it to legalization. Because I don't think that they feel justified back in 1937 when they legalized it and they criminalized it. I think that
What year was that?
I think it was 1937. Now, plus or minus a few years. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I know it was in the early 20th century where we criminalized it, and we criminalized it across the globe, not just here in America. A lot of the UN nations also joined in. We pushed this war on drugs. And I'm sure there's a lot of backlash from the UN right now because of Colorado and Washington being legalized as states, and America not fulfilling their, I feel the words. I can't think of the words to say, but no tolerance. And it seems that right now America has tolerance because the people want it. And change, and a lot of things is we always look. You always look to your leaders for change, and on these type of subjects, it really comes from the bottom. It comes from the grassroots people who go get this information for you, use the internet and share it, because the top doesn't want to change. They want to maintain the system that's in place, figure out ways to work within this. Because change is a lot hard.
I think that the kind of revenue these cannabis companies are making right now, they'll be able to invest a lot in that change.
Right, and I think, as well as like you do with tobacco and Morris Phillips, and they have the biggest anti-tobacco campaign on education. I think you'll have the same thing from cannabis companies who put it out and let you know about the medical benefits, who put it out and let you know what happens when you use it recreationally or under 18 when you're a youth, on its development impacts on your brain, things like that. I think all of that will come from funding that's brought on by these companies themselves. I think that they'll, be able to educate us on the drug much more than we have now. Right now, we know that based on commercials, you sink into your couch, or your dog talks to you, or you forget things all the time.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying. There's not enough funding for them to do that kind of research right now.
Right.
But I think if it goes mainstream, it's going to be more funding available to research.
We would hope so. I mean, these are all what we hope to happen. Obviously, we can't. We don't make policies, and we don't.
And the problem with this country, you can have lobbyists lobbying on both sides.
Right.
So lobbyists for the companies that are in place right now
for
selling,
cannabis,
they might say, "Well, we don't want as much research."
Maybe.
And the people that are trying to get into it might say, well, we want more research because we think it could be beneficial. You don't know.
Right. It's one of those things that it's going to have to go down to the individual's research themselves, which is kind of a shame. It's kind of the same way. Hopefully, they'll give you the same type of thing that we had in school with sex ed and tobacco use and alcohol use and all those the warnings you get as a young child to see what these people are and what it is. And I think,
what kind of school did you go to?
I went to a public high school where they taught us this stuff, and they wanted to make sure that we knew that we can make the best decisions for ourselves, and that peer pressure shouldn't take place and things like that. And I think the millennials are getting that as well. So, and I think they're the big push behind this. I think that they have the most information because they were born with the information age, and the internet's at their hands. They can search anything they want. They're kind of the big push behind legalizing this. And because I think marijuana has a bad perception in the community based on people think, oh, hippie. Immediately.
That's right.
As if, and
the
as
tie-dye
if,
and...
right, as if that's a bad thing to be. Anyway, like, oh, you hang out in courtyards and play guitar, you must be going nowhere with
Hey,
life.
that's Corey.
Right? Well, Corey's a guitar player, but he doesn't hang out in courtyards, I don't think, anymore. It'd be a little weird, being 41.
Not since we hired him. No, not since we hired him. No,
but you know what I'm saying? It's just perception. But I also think, what are the trickle-down effects? If this does, continue the way we see it, I mean, marketing companies will have it. Are they going to have to worry about commercials, much like alcohol? If you see an alcohol commercial, they put, 20 sexy people into a commercial, everyone's having a blast. If you were to think about this, which is a worse drug for us, is in the drugs, alcohol or anything else in the world? Alcohol is the worst. But we look at alcohol with the perception of, if we want to party, there's going to be booze. If we want to, if we go to a funeral and we're looking to reminisce, booze is there. If you went to a kid's party, booze is there. If you go to a party and they don't have booze, what's the first thing? What? I'm not staying here that long.
I know. If you're sitting and watching TV, the booze is there.
Well, maybe, but for some.
Oh, that's just me.
But you get my understanding. It's just perception. We don't have a good perception of it as a country, and we have this perception of alcohol as it's the greatest thing, and it enhances all of our party lives. And we know that it actually has negative side effects as well because of the information. I think we just need more information before.
Well, and that's why we wanted to have this show, because I think that commercial real estate people need to know some of the facts as well, because if the zoning comes in, once the licensing is out or available, they issue license, then they come up with the zoning areas. It's going to probably be light industry.
Right.
So it's going to be industrial parks.
And I think a lot of people on our show are really interested in this because, these shops have now been granted to Massachusetts here locally for us, as well as New York. They both just passed the medical marijuana.
Right.
And so now they're both going to be looking, how do we set up dispensaries, much like your pharmacy, things like that. So I think it really plays a big role into people who own retail centers.
Right. So you have retail now that you can be leasing.
Right. And other tenants who own these buildings may have pros and cons that they may need information. You may have to be, hey, listen, we're opening up a dispensary, at the end of our retail block here. This is what it's going to do. This is the foot traffic it brings.
But I'd like to find out what kind of pushback they get.
Yeah, me too.
From opening up a cannabis store.
Right.
In
That's
some
what
city
I'm
or
most
town.
interested in, because I think for brokers and building owners, this is really big, and what a new industry that's going to be looking for brick and mortar, unlike an online retailer.
Right. Well, we'll find out from Derek Peterson, the CEO of Terra Tech, when he comes on the next segment.
Right.
But before we go to a break, I wanted to thank our sponsors of the show: Comstack, Video Doorman, City of Marlborough, Mass., City of Rochester, New Hampshire, City of Hartford, Connecticut, and the City of Warwick, Rhode Island. And some events that are coming up: the HELP Conference next week at the Seaport Hotel, April 13th and 14th. We also have Building Impact Non-Gala, Boston, at the One Financial Center, April 15th. We have the New England Real Estate Journal, Cocktails and Conversations of Northern New England. That's in Portsmouth. That is April 23rd. We are going to also be at Connecticut Business Expo 2015. You can find out more information at ctexpo.com. That's June 4th. We'll also be at that event, that expo, I should say. NEBFM 2015, the Boston Convention Center, June 17th and 18th, which will also be at that event.
Right. We'll be doing shows at both those last two events in June.
That's right.
So if you happen to stop by there and you want to get on air and talk to us, make sure you swing by our booth.
And we'll be at the HELP Conference as well, and our event.
Right.
Doing our show. And we'll be right back on Money Matters Radio Network.
The next level in commercial real estate. This is New England Real Estate Radio on the Money Matters Radio Network and online at moneymattersboston.com.
Commercial real estate can be a risky endeavor if you don't have all the information you need to make an educated decision. Why spend time digging for data when CompStack provides investors, lenders, and landlords accurate lease comps for office, industrial, and retail properties, starting rents, concessions, and more in just a few clicks? The world's largest investors and lenders use CompStack to benchmark their properties and underwrite their deals. Shouldn't you? CompStack. Better data, better deals. Visit getleasecomps.com today.
Rick Kaplan on the Money Matters Radio Network and online at moneymattersboston.com.
And we're back on New England Real Estate Journal Radio. I'm Rick Kaplan with Eric Wilson, and we have on the phone with us is Derek Peterson. He is the CEO of Terra Tech, which is a publicly traded urban agriculture company. Good afternoon, Derek.
Hey, Eric. Hey, Rick. How you doing? Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on the show, Derek. Can you tell us a little bit about Terra Tech?
Yeah, in a 30,000-foot view, we're somewhat of an agricultural company. We grow a line of organic produce called Edible Garden that we sell throughout Massachusetts, basically most of the Northeast, in ShopRite, in D'Agostino's, BJ's Wholesale, Walmart, etc. We've transitioned the company over the last year and a half to 2 years to becoming involved with medical cannabis just because, again, it's a crop just like basil or lettuce is. Mm-hmm. We have expertise in that area, and we see the business opportunity and the upside potential in that particular industry. So we've generally gravitated the company over to that side of the marketplace to capture the growth that we see coming over the next few years.
So now you have licenses to grow and to sell in different states?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's a lot different than a normal business where we say, hey, we're going to make widgets. Let's open up a factory and start making and selling widgets. The difference here is we're still dealing with a commodity that has federal illegality. It's still a Schedule I narcotic from the Fed's perspective, although states are putting together programs and passing legislation to legalize for both medicinal and recreational use. And that's kind of where we fit in. So what we have to do then is go through these state application processes or these local application processes and compete, usually in an RFP-type manner, to get one of these permits to operate. So before we're even thinking about making our widgets, for lack of a better analogy, we've got to compete in these legislative processes to make sure we have the permits that allow us to do so. And right now, we just secured 8 of them throughout Nevada. We operate in California as well at this point. We're looking at New York and some other markets around the country.
So, I was gonna ask now. Does your business is based basically on the vote as well, correct? So if you want
to vote, you said?
Yeah, on vote. So if you want to go to a new state, you have to hope that it's voted legalized or decriminalized.
That's exactly right. And you watched Florida just go through it. It missed by 1 to 2% last election process. So that's one of the difficult things. We can't just jump in any state we want to go into. We've got to deal with the 20 some odd states right now that have current legalization, and there are many more on the ballot for 2016. But that being said, it's the market is what the market is, depending on where and what different municipalities have passed legislation.
Right, Derek. Do you have to work with anybody on the education side to the voters? A lot of disinformation over the last 60 years, so to speak, may give people a different perception of what medical cannabis actually is.
That's a great question, and you're 100% right. There's still that kind of Reagan-era overhang and that reefer madness type mentality that exists out there, and people still have that perception, or that misperception, I should say, that it's a gateway drug. And none of the studies that have been done overseas for the length of period of time that they've been done, and there's been hundreds, if not thousands of them, none of them lead to that type of a conclusion. So we do spend a lot of time making sure that we not only educate voters, but we educate legislators more importantly, because if we educate the legislators and they understand the value of associated, not just from a taxation or job creation standpoint or an economic stimulus standpoint, but from a patient standpoint, that's where we like to start. And then again, we try to transition that over to the voters. And we did our best in Florida to do that, but there are groups that put money behind the opposite side of that push as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that we talk about quite frequently on the show is commercial real estate, because that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And, if people want to know why are we talking about cannabis on a commercial real estate show. And, we had a little bit of a conversation, me and you, and the zoning has a lot to do with where you're going to start your business once you get a license. Correct?
That's 100% right. You know, the easiest part of the business is setting up your infrastructure, producing your product, and selling your product, which for most businesses, that's the most competitive process. The two most difficult things in our business are what I think was what Eric just asked, which is getting that legislative process moving and getting an initiative passed, number one. Once that initiative is passed, is locating and finding the real estate. And there's a few things that make that very, very difficult. Number one, usually during the legislative process, these different municipalities or governmental agencies put very, very tight zoning parameters around these types of businesses because there's still that fear going back to that, that perception of cannabis. They want to make sure that they regulate it and they compartmentalize it into different areas in their communities. So there may be things like, hey, it has to be zoned light industrial. It can't be any more than 500 feet away from a public park or school. Can't be any more than 1,000 feet from a government building or whatever it happens to be. It can't be a square building. It has to be a round building. Those are the difficult things you deal with when you're going through the process. And what that means is there's a lot of people competing for these permits right now. And if the legislation is tight and the zoning parameters are tight, that means there's a very limited population in terms of potential buildings that you can utilize to do this type of business. And number two, there's also, again, going back to that federal illegality issue, is there's an asset forfeiture risk out there for a lot of these building owners. So it's very difficult to find leases. So most of the time you have to do a lease option or a purchase because the landlords are still somewhat uncomfortable, even though that risk has really significantly dissipated over the last couple of years.
So, Derek, it's not possible for you to have a facility in Colorado, get a license in New York, and able to ship from Colorado to New York?
Yeah, that you can't cross state lines. Again, going back to that analogy of, I'd love to be able to just say, hey, we're going to manufacture widgets. I'm going to put my factory in Texas, and I'm going to distribute to all 50 states. It doesn't work like that here. What works in one state may not work in the other. What works for packaging or a building, a retail building in California may not work in New York, may not work in Colorado, may not work in Nevada. So it's a different approach to every market. So it's, that's the other real risk in operating issue that these entrepreneurs put up with on top of the zoning issues is, how do they adapt to the different fits in the different marketplaces? It can be cumbersome. But again, the real estate aspect to me is probably one of the most competitive sides of the business. And what you generally see is a spike in lease rates and a spike in property values in these different municipalities where these legislations are passed. We saw it in Nevada. We saw stuff that was going for $1 a square foot overnight jumped up to $1.50, $1.80 a square foot, and that's what becomes prohibitively difficult for us.
Yeah, so I was actually going to touch on that. So you said you're open you're already in California, you're in Colorado. Was the commercial real estate industry as a whole on your side? Was one of the pushing forces? Because I would assume with the way they jumped on technology, because they needed brick and mortar offices, they would be the same way. Because with everything trying to go online and be retail there, that this is a great new industry for brick and mortar.
Yeah, it was, and especially in a lot of these depressed areas, because a lot of the zoning parameters generally push these businesses out, especially the cultivation side of it, out to these, the less desirable areas of the communities, and that's generally where people are sitting with empty real estate. So, it's revitalized a lot of areas. You saw that in Colorado. Their industrial areas, their warehouse space is very limited now, where if you backed up, 5 years ago, you could have had your pick of multiple different locations. We saw that in Nevada as well. The industrial areas located around the Strip that were, again, sitting vacant for a long period of time had high vacancy rates. You're seeing a lot of those that got picked up in this last round of licenses that were issued. Same thing in the Bay Area of California, San Francisco, Oakland, and the northern part. You're seeing a lot of that industrial space that's being taken for this particular purpose. And it actually has revitalized a lot of dead areas, and that's been, that part of it's been a very helpful byproduct of legalization for a lot of these property owners.
I've also seen that a lot of companies are joining into this industry as well. We did see, some companies want to be the Procter & Gamble of the medical cannabis industry. How is the competitive, as knowing that right now it's illegal federally, how many companies are trying to get into this before, all this legislation gets passed or doesn't get passed?
Yeah, when we started in the business 2009, 2010, where they were still putting people in jail back then, there was I want to say there was maybe 10 publicly traded companies in the space, and I think today there's somewhere between 250 to 300, if that gives you any type of an indication of the growth over the last few years. What's happened is you had Eric Holder and you've had the Obama administration come out in support of giving states the ability to regulate this on their own. And now you're seeing, the CARES Act and a lot of other bipartisan bills that have been put into Congress that support legalization in some fashion. And as soon as you've seen that bipartisan support, you see a risk profile that drops. And when you see a risk profile that drops, you see a lot of extra people that weren't willing to do it back in the 2009, 2010, when there was the risk of actually going to jail. But now there's more of an economic risk or traditional business risk. So yeah, the competition has increased pretty drastically, and there are a lot of real players and a lot of people that have a lot of money behind them going for these permits. We saw again that in Nevada. We saw the competition pool increase significantly from our perspective.
Now, if you're comparing this to like a regular type of pharmaceutical item, what kind of profit margin? Is it a much higher profit margin for something like marijuana?
A lot of that is really market-based. So, it differs a little bit between, say, California and Colorado and Nevada, depending on scarcity issues. When Colorado legalized for recreational purposes, they ran across with some scarcity issues because there were a lot of additional people going for cannabis at that particular time. So the margins are, there's 30 or 40% margins, which is somewhat traditional. It's a little bit greater than, some of the other traditional manufacturing or agricultural businesses, of course. But that being said, the other issue that these entrepreneurs and these businesses face is the tax issues. So there's a tax line item called 280E, which doesn't allow people that are engaging in federally illegal narcotics to deduct traditional business expenses. So traditional dispensaries or medical cannabis facilities don't have the ability to deduct things like labor, insurance costs, accounting, et cetera, and so forth. So your effective tax rate actually rises pretty significantly based on that in comparison to a normal business.
Yeah, so you're running a business now that you don't get the tax breaks? Is that correct?
Yeah, you can't take very many deductions, and that's something that's being worked on heavily, and there's a lot of lobbying going on right now with the industry trying to work with the IRS to get 280E to be removed, because that was something that was put in place back in the 80s to affect the drug cartels, but now is being applied to people that are trying to run and operate medical marijuana dispensaries to serve patients. So it's been it's whatever extra margin there is usually gets eaten up in the higher effective tax rate, and that's something that I think will normalize as time goes on, and those things will be dealt with. But there's a lot of headwinds. People think it's get rich overnight, and it's just not the case in the cannabis industry right now. Of course, it's a huge market. It's a very large market with a significant amount of potential, but there's a lot of competition coming in right now. You've got things like effective tax rates that you have to deal with, as well as lack of banking. There's a lot of banking institutions right now that will take this type of business, which forces all cash transactions, which again adds risk and adds additional costs associated with operating your business.
But it does help the security companies.
It does, and
it does create a whole new industry for them.
That's one of the economic drivers of this industry. When we talk, it's not only about helping patients, but in the taxes that attached to this, it's that kind of multiplier effect of all the peripheral jobs that are created that do well based upon legalization. So whether it's an architect or an engineering firm or a real estate agent or a building owner, there's a huge multiplier effect when it comes to the cannabis industry in terms of revitalizing and energizing the economics in a lot of depressed areas.
Well, you do get the tax break on the real estate.
We do, yeah.
Yeah, that's
that we do. And the odd thing about the 280E is you actually get to write off. The only write-off you do get to take is the write-off of the actual the drugs themselves, the marijuana itself, and that's odd, right? You can't write off any of your other normal business expenses, but you can write off your cost of goods. So there's a lot of things that need to be worked out over the next couple of years to make the business kind of in a realm where it has the ability to expand drastically. But right now, it is difficult to operate, but it is a great business and it's got a lot of upside.
Well, here's a weird question I have, since obviously in the commercial real estate purpose, you would have to grow locally in New York if you opened up shops, and grow locally in Massachusetts, where farmland isn't as, obviously you don't have the same year-round like you would say in California, where you could grow year-round and then ship it everywhere. Does that, the energy, is it still efficient enough to run it here in Massachusetts, even though you have to pay for all your lights, your hydroponic machines, or whatever else machines that go with this?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we run a controlled environment Dutch-style greenhouse, a 5-acre one, which is enormous in New Jersey, right? So, you know, we deal with some pretty harsh weather, and we grow basil and lettuce and that type of thing year-round in that environment.
Okay.
So the economics are such that it makes sense for us to be able to do that for basil. Of course, it's going to make sense for us to be able to do that for cannabis with a higher price per pound associated with it. So the economics work well, and we can really do things that reduce the energy costs. We have our family that runs the farming institution is a Dutch family that's got, generations of farming experience, particularly greenhouse experience. So the measure of efficiency that we've been able to bring into our processes from a commercial standpoint is significant. That's allowed us to drop our production costs quite drastically, with replacing artificial lighting with sunlight through greenhouses, but still producing a top-tier product. So that's where we ultimately think the industry is going to go for that very reason that you just brought up.
Well, we have to go to a break right now, Derek. We're going to come back. I want to talk a little bit more about the commercial real estate side of the business when we come back from the break. And we'll be right back on Money Matters Radio Network.
Rick Kaplan and Eric Wilson, right here on the Money Matters Radio Network and online at moneymattersboston.com.
Listen, are you living in a condo or co-op? Do you have difficulty receiving deliveries from UPS, FedEx, or your pharmacy when you're not home? Well, there's a solution. Video Doorman. It's a security system with live on-call operators for condos and co-ops that receives packages when you're out, stores them in a safe package room, and then notifies you about your delivery. They can even handle dry cleaning, pickup, and delivery. But there's more. If you come home late at night and don't feel safe, just press the Video Doorman key fob, and the Video Doorman operator will greet you by name and escort you right up to your floor. He can see you and speak to you and handle any potential problem. And Video Doorman costs only about $1 a day. Call Video Doorman at 888-697-3630 or visit videodoorman.com to receive a free building evaluation. That number again is 888-697-3630. Call now, feel safer, and never miss a delivery again.
New England Real Estate Journal Radio.
And we're back on New England Real Estate Journal Radio. I'm Rick Kaplan with Eric Wilson, and we're talking with Derek Peterson. He's the founder and the CEO of Terra Tech, a publicly traded urban agriculture company. And we were talking a little bit before the break about some of the commercial real estate effects that you get from this. And one of the questions I had was, how many retail locations can you open in an area? That's one of them. Why don't we answer that one first, and we'll go on to some of the others.
I mean, and that really depends on the market. That, again, going back to every legislative process and every demographic is a little bit different. So, in Nevada, they were issuing the permits out individually. So, however many you competed for, you got. We happened to win 4 retail permits there, so we had the ability to potentially open up four retail shops there. New York's a little bit different of an animal. They're putting out 5 licenses that allow you to open up 4 dispensaries and one main cultivation and production facility. So New York's a little bit different. California, no cap. It really depends on the city within California because they do the zoning and legislative based on the city. Colorado, I don't think there's any limit associated with how many you can compete for. It's just a matter of whether or not you're successful going through the competitive process. And then ultimately they'll put caps on it when they feel like they have enough to service the different demographics of the different area. They'll generally put a cap and won't issue any more licenses. It's a lot like a liquor license process.
So, Derek, once you have this license and they zone the area, do you get a lot of pushback from the communities that you're going into?
Well, generally, if you're approaching the market, in a smart manner, you're doing your homework before you go into a particular community. Because again, a lot of these competitive processes or RFP processes require you to put together a pretty significant response and proposal. So that being said, you're generally going to try to find a piece of real estate where you have a supportive environment around you, meaning the local community. Because if you don't, you're going to get people that write letters and call the city council members or whoever's in charge of the permitting process. And if that's the case, that could potentially affect your ability or your outcome to come out being successful. So you want to try to do your homework in advance, talk to neighbors, talk to neighboring businesses, reach out to some of the residential community, take their temperature. But you got to be sensitive because, again, going back to what Eric said earlier, there is still, a somewhat of a negative stigma or just a misunderstanding about the benefits of cannabis in some areas with some demographics. So you have to make sure you address that ahead of time.
Although I would think it's getting a little easier because you have somewhat of a track record, so you can show the community what kind of benefit it has for the area you open in.
That's a great point. I mean, Oakland is a great example. We run a facility up in Oakland, California, and Oakland's a depressed city, and it usually has a relatively high crime rate in terms of its annual rankings. And what we've seen is year over year, our crime blotters have gone down significantly. We've created a significant amount of jobs. The area around the dispensary has been revitalized. A community garden was planted. Those types of things. So you see a lot of positive benefits associated with these businesses opening. And yeah, you're right. You're able to go into these new environments and say, hey, look, here's a case study. Here's what happened in this city, and we want to bring this same type of result here in your depressed area. And those are things that we try to talk to legislators and the community about.
Derek, what about, I think mostly about, say I own a building, I put this farm in, energy efficiency is a big thing that I bring on a lot of guests about, this green movement, and how much energy actually is it a huge energy suck, like whether in the water, or resource, I should say, how much resources goes in to field one of your crops, so to speak, and is there ways to, or are they making new ways with new technology in order to negate the carbon footprint that will come from another huge agricultural industry?
That's a good question. There's a significant carbon footprint associated with the way that people are cultivating cannabis today, which is why we want to try to work with these legislative bodies to make sure that in their zoning and in their legislative process, they allow for greenhouse cultivation. Because if you're allowed to grow inside of a greenhouse, that means you don't have to have the high-intensity artificial lighting, which is the hugest energy suck in the entire facility, and the associated air conditioning that you need to offset the heat element that's associated with that lighting. So you have to maintain a constant environment. Those lights that the plants need to grow put off an excessive amount of heat, which means that you need air conditioning to combat that heat, and then you need dehumidification. There's just a lot of things that work against each other in that environment that become very cost prohibitive, which is one of the reasons I think the price is what it is today. But, you alleviate a significant amount of that in greenhouse cultivation. Unfortunately, a lot of legislative bodies don't understand the benefits just yet, or they don't understand the concerns with the traditional cultivation and the water and the resources and the energy that's used in producing a pound of plant. And we try to educate them. Nevada was a great example. We weren't successful there. They didn't allow for greenhouse cultivation, so everybody's stuck growing in warehouses. But the fight's not over. We then go back to the legislative bodies and say, look at the energy suck that's going on now. Look what we can do in a comparative process if we're allowed to do in greenhouses. Their concern is the safety. They look at a greenhouse as, hey, glass walls, you can't secure it. But most people aren't breaking into a greenhouse and grabbing a plant with a giant root system attached to it and a bunch of soil and running away with it.
Right.
So there's again a lot of misconceptions that we have to deal with, and there's those misconceptions do at times affect legislation.
Right. I mean, it totally adds years onto the process.
Yeah, but
cost.
whether it's glass or it's in an aluminum frame building, I don't think it's much of a difference.
Perception is reality, Rick.
Yeah, that's true.
Crazy world we live in. Yeah. What about so? I think of it as obviously in the future it may be something like, there's a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner for the drug caffeine. If you go to liquor stores and liquor license for bars, and these things are everywhere. And has anyone ever done this is how much money this industry actually brings to your community, so that you could say, hey, listen, this is what people want, this is what it transfers?
Yeah, the nice part is what we're seeing is because this was a black market, there isn't a lot of historical data other than the DEA seizure records and trying to extrapolate those in terms of how big the market is. But now you're actually seeing organizations like ArcView Network put together diagnostic reports of the industry, how big it is, how it affects the communities, those types of things. So now we're actually being able to establish real data points, which is important, again, going through legislative processes, is to make sure that we have access to quality and efficient information that's accurate. And now we're starting to see organizations putting that together, but there isn't a lot of it from a historical purpose, just because, again, this industry's existed in the black market for so long.
So when you're going for a license, do you have to be in a certain business or a certain type of category to be able to even apply for a license?
Everybody's going for them now. Nevada was a great example. I hate to keep going back to that, but it's the most recent.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not a lot of examples you can go back to, though, Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
There's only about 4 of them.
We saw a lot of ex-casino families and casino money going for these permits, and with no experience, in the actual industry. And that's one of the reasons I think we've done so well is, not only do we have experience manufacturing hydroponic equipment and understand hydroponic technologies, but we've got a very significant, very strong urban agricultural experience, running GFSI, food-grade quality, organic facilities. And again, who do you want to buy your medicine from at the end of the day? Somebody that potentially grew it in a basement in a dirty environment, or somebody that operates facilities to these standards? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing. The legislative people, and as well as the patient community, is liking the fact that we're actually able to bring to the market something that's consistent, that's been tested, that's high quality, and that's where I think the confidence is being built in us over the long haul.
Well, there were, years ago with the telecommunication companies, they would go after the license for a certain area, and they weren't even in the industry, but they would get the license, and then they would be selling it to one of the communication companies. So is that something you think that's going to be going on, that everyone's going to be going out to get these, and then they get the license, and now they sell it for $5 million to someone,
Yeah, there's a lot of transferability issues. Some areas don't even allow you to transfer the license over to a new owner. So, Colorado, for example, if you want to sell a business there, you can only sell it to another resident. So an outside person can't come in to buy it. So maybe over time, if the borders open up and there's some broader federal legalization, you might see people that are doing something like that. But what you're seeing more often than not is those people that have the money to put behind this project are trying to go out there and find the talent in other areas and bring them under their umbrella, so that way they can fill any talent gap that they may have. The problem with that is the people that are generally available to do that on a contracting basis aren't the best in the industry. The best people in the industry are going for these permits directly rather than subbing themselves out or partnering up with somebody.
So you're already about 10 steps ahead of a lot of these guys.
Yeah, but they're closing in. Like I said, it's getting more and more competitive on a day-by-day basis as people start to see the potential economics of it. And again, as the risk profiles go down, that's the most important factor. Nobody wanted to do this when there was the risk of getting their door kicked in by the DEA. Mm-hmm. But now that that's been alleviated to a certain degree, now you're seeing, a rush of people, flocking for this green rush, for lack of a better term.
We've touched a lot about the business side of it and the aspects of commercial real estate, zoning, and things like that. I just want to ask, simple question about education. When you were talking about talent and trying to find talent to come in, so you have these greenhouses. Do you go to college campuses and look at these horticulturists, or is it something that you go overseas because they may have, like you said, Dutch family from Amsterdam, and they already have it legal there, and they're already working these farms? How do you get talent to come into your industry?
There's a tremendous amount of experience everywhere. The nice part about this industry is it's going through this maturation process or this development process. Is you're now seeing institutions. I think we talked on break about the California institution, Amsterdam, that's trained a ton of people to operate in this industry, both on the cultivation and the dispensary side. Now you've got an institute in Massachusetts as well. I think it's called the Northeastern Institute.
It is.
That teaches marijuana classes and how to cultivate, how to dispense, how to work with patients, to understand the product. You're seeing training programs, and now if you're looking for quality employees and people to help run and operate these facilities, there's even websites like weedhire.com where you can find postings of people that are looking for jobs that have experience in the industry. But a lot of the talent and a lot of the historical industry talent comes from California, just because the industry there was one of the first to legalize and has been so developed and has such a rich history in the black market that so much of the expertise, some of the greatest strains, some of the greatest growers come from the Mendocino or the Emerald Triangle area up in Northern California.
The Humboldt County? I've seen that also on the History Channel.
I have to tell you, Derek, though, I don't know a lot about marijuana, but if you're around someone that does smoke marijuana, they seem to know everything about it, how to grow it, what lighting to use, how you burn it.
Ask anybody about any of their passions. If you like my passion, basketball, I'll tell you everything about basketball since the start of the ABA, and that's just how you get it. So I think that's probably goes the same for people who use recreation or people that use it for medical. And that's good. You should have people that are high on their information.
I would say recreational probably know more about that than medical.
Probably like criminals know the law better than people that don't commit crime.
Exactly.
There's a huge cultural piece to this industry, just because, again, it's people think this is a developing market. It's really not. It's a market that's already developed. It's just transitioning from a black market to a more overt market.
Right.
There's a rich history, whether it's the reggae history or the surf culture history, whatever it happens to be. There's just a rich history of people that use cannabis and loving to go back and talk about the different strains, where they originated from. They're very passionate about the product. And a lot of people have always asked me, it's just a matter of time before big alcohol or big tobacco comes into the marketplace. And, great. So they of course, they're going to come in at some point. I think we all understand and recognize that. But for them to be able to get penetration, being a big kind of commercialized company coming into an industry that's got such a tight culture associated with it, is going to be extremely difficult. It's a lot like people that are craft beer or craft wine enthusiasts. It's a lot like that. It's just going to be a very difficult market for a mainstream or mass company to come in and try to commercialize overnight. Not to say there isn't a market for the Budweiser of cannabis, but there's certainly a very significant niche and cultural market for high-end cannabis consumption. And we've developed a brand because of that, that we've launched into the market a few months ago, that's getting a lot of penetration here in California, just because there's some phenomenal growers that have a phenomenal high-end product that deserves a brand. So as that industry matures, again, so many of these growers were commodity growers, and now they're maturing to these branded growers that people can say, oh, wow, that's the Patron of this, or the Dos Equis of that, or whatever it happens to be. I always hate to compare it to alcohol because it's so different, but from a marketing perspective, I think we're going to see a lot of similarities there.
I have one last question, and this is about, as you had mentioned, strands and the different types of plants. Obviously, it's a plant that grows all over the world. Do you have people on your team that go out and hunt these strands, or maybe go to, say Africa has something that no one's seen before, or somewhere up in Siberia, or wherever these weeds grow? Do you have somebody that goes out and hunts these things?
The transportation of seeds over borders is a very touchy, gray area subject of the legality of that. So we try to stay away from doing stuff like that for that particular reason. But my team has been embedded in California for so long that in California, again, has such a rich history of this industry, and there's a tremendous amount of genetics that exist in California. And there's a lot of ways to combine different genetics with tissue culturing and other very, very kind of scientific agricultural processes that people are now doing to derive different results out of a plant. Whether they want to cross a sativa with an indica at different ratios and produce a product that's higher in CBD, whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of tissue culturing, which is a very natural way for them to kind of cross hybridize these different strains. So we've got a tremendous amount of access in California to wonderful strains and a huge multitude of different plant matters. So for us to have to do that isn't much of a necessity. In other states, that may not be the case, though.
Right.
So, Derek, I know you were talking about New York. Do you already applied for the licensing there? Or are you going to?
No, they actually just put out their draft regulations. I think it was last week. So we think there's going to be an RFP or the permitting process that's put out sometime here in the next few weeks. So no, we haven't put an application in yet because they haven't opened up the application window, but we think that's going to happen in the next few weeks.
And if someone wants to find out more information about Terra Tech, what's the website they would go to? TerraTechCorp.com, TerraTechCorp.com, like corporation, and then the brand of cannabis is IVXX.com.
Nice. We appreciate you coming on and enlightening us on the medical cannabis industry, and because we know it's coming here to Massachusetts fairly soon. So that was really interesting.
And maybe we'll see you in Mass soon.
I grew up in Massachusetts. It's been a slow legislative process there. I'm looking forward to them actually getting something open and starting to see the industry develop there.
Right.
When you start opening up places, you got to invite us down so we can see the operation.
I absolutely will. I appreciate the time, guys, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks again,
Thank you, Derek. And that was Derek Peterson, the CEO of Terra Tech. And we'll be right back on Money Matters Radio Network.
Rick Kaplan is right here on the Money Matters Radio Network.
And we're back on New England Real Estate Journal Radio. I'm Rick Kaplan with Eric Wilson, and we just finished the interview with Derek Peterson, CEO of Terra Tech. And it was very interesting to find out.
So much information.
This is a new industry that's coming into this country.
Right. An old industry, but
well,
it's transferring from black to.
It's a old industry that was not a legal industry,
Right.
which is now becoming legal. But
Are you guys super hungry just after talking about it?
Yeah,
I know, right?
I
That's
get
so
the
fun.
munchies for some reason. Yeah.
No, I thought it was. He was very enlightening for us, especially on the commercial real estate side and the energy resources and stuff like that. That once it goes in 5 years, we'll be looking at how to do better greenhouses and how to do better buildings and stuff like that for it.
Yeah, but one of the things you were talking about how liquor stores are on every corner.
Every corner.
And, eventually it probably will come down to something like that, or that liquor store is not going to just be beer, wine, and liquor. It's going to be beer, wine, and cannabis.
Maybe. I would doubt that they would ever put those two together. I don't think you'd ever want to sell two drugs in the same store.
Why?
I just don't think they do that. It's not like a pharmacy.
Yeah, I know, but it's not that type of a product, though.
Maybe. Well, again, that's
But
what he's saying is it's a medical product. That's why they have different strands and they crossbreed them in order to fix different ailments that you may have.
Yeah, so you're going to be able to go to CVS and buy it?
That's what they're building dispensaries such as, like a pharmaceutical. Like instead of me going in and getting Sudafed or Tylenol or Bayer, and
Yeah,
all
but
these
if it goes
different acids.
recreational,
medical, it's already like that. Recreational just means that anybody can do it. But medical, you go in and you would say, okay, I want IVXX as in his brand.
right?
And you say, I want, the
Right,
whatever.
but that's a medical brand.
Yeah, whatever the
Right.
European metric scale is for it, and you'd ask for that, and they would give it to you, and then you'd say, okay, this cures my headache,
Right.
or this cures my gout. I don't know, whatever they all cure.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's how they're going to build. I don't know. It was just really interesting because I know that it comes up on our votes, and we have all this information.
It's funny because we did have someone that wrote an article about.
Yeah, Goldman and Pease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was it from Golden and Peas?
It was from Goldman. Oh no, you're talking about the article,
Yeah.
The Pitfalls of Pot
Right.
from Jeffrey Turk from
Yeah.
Turk and Cujano. But we had Howard Goldman here on the show who talked about what it was like for people who have medical marijuana cards, patients who live next door to you, and you guys that might have shared central air, so
Right.
things like that. And that was really cool. We've been talking about it a lot because it's really making a huge impact on not only our daily lives, but also our business lives.
Yeah, and I think that if it becomes mainstream, now there's a lot more research that we were talking about at the
Right.
beginning, and that helps this product to become a little more available, as well as it can maybe help
Right.
a lot of other different types of diseases. Or
It's funny. We didn't have time, and we could. I could have asked more questions. Obviously, this is a commercial real estate show. If this was a different show, I would have asked more about GMOs and things like that, and what they're going to do about how do people feel about that and gene splicing of these seeds and things like that. But it was just, it's crazy where it's gone. I never thought so when I was in high school. That I would ever see it legal in my lifetime, and it's just crazy that that's where it's going. And I think a big push behind it is the finances that come with it.
it's things change. Look
Yeah.
at solar and
Yeah.
energy.
Everything.
Who thought?
20 years ago, that would be even be a concern. But
I mean,
hopefully,
when I was a kid, who would thought that you getting 25, 30 miles to a gallon in a car,
right?
in your gas.
Exactly. Technology just changes and advances. But
That's right.
hopefully we'll see everybody in the next couple of weeks out at our events. Next week, Help Conference or the BI Non-Gala, Building Impact. And also, we'll see you April 23rd at the Cocktails and Conversations event. And hopefully we'll see you guys all there. Thanks.
We'll be out and about throughout the city. And this deal is done.